When I first left the US and started living in Europe, I thought I had it all figured out. I was an American with a strong sense of identity, sure of who I was and how I saw the world. I believed that my way of thinking, my American way, was the best. I didn't realize that at the time, but I was narrow-minded. I was convinced that the American perspective was the only perspective that mattered. It wasn't until I immersed myself completely into a different culture that I began to question everything that I had ever known about the world and about myself. But here's the thing. Narrow-mindedness doesn't belong to just one country, one culture, or one way of life. It's easy to think that it's something that only happens in certain places with certain types of people. But I realize that narrow-mindedness is literally everywhere. It's in every corner of the world, whether you're in the US, Europe, or anywhere else. And it comes from a lack of understanding, from being too comfortable what we know and afraid to see beyond what we know. Living in Europe has forced me to confront my own biases, my own assumptions, and my own limited view of the world. But it wasn't just about adjusting to a new language or a different way of life. It was about unlearning everything that I ever knew about pretty much everything, about people, about cultures, and how we live in this world collectively. And the more I saw, the more I realized that this narrow-minded view wasn't just mine. We all carry it in some form or another. But here's something strange. Realizing that narrow-mindedness exists everywhere is actually such a freeing feeling. It means that no one is stuck in their limited perspective. We all have this potential to grow, to open our minds, and to embrace different ways of thinking. It's about balancing the best parts of your culture with the lessons that we learn from others, other cultures, learning that there's no one right way to be, but instead there are many paths to that common understanding within the world.
Caught behind Venetian blinds, had to reach for the city lights. This ain't where I belong.
One thing that I've come to understand through this experience is the psychology behind why people sometimes feel superior to others. It's easy to think that it's just about culture, but there's something deeper at play here. Something that's wired into our psychology. And the reason I'm bringing this up is because recently I read these two books, The Social Animal, and the other one is called The Psychology of Prejudice and Discrimination. The Social Animal explores how social identity and in-group bias shape our perceptions of others, including the tendency to favor our own culture and view other cultures as inferior, which in result produces cultural prejudice. The psychology of prejudice and discrimination, on the other hand, talks about the cognitive and social processes behind prejudice, including how individuals use cultural differences to categorize people into us versus them, leading to discrimination and cultural bias. Because of these two books, I realized that we humans have an innate tendency to categorize the world around us. We group people into us versus them. And this is something that's been ingrained in us for centuries. From a psychological standpoint, this can be traced back to something called in-group bias. It's a natural tendency to favor our own group over others, whether that's our country, our culture, our family, or even a political party. Case in point, in the USA for the past few years. This bias can make us believe that our way of life, our values, and our beliefs are somehow better than others. It gives us a sense of identity and safety. If we feel superior, it means we're right. And by extension, we're in control. It can also stem from fear. So then if you think about this, knowing this now, this kind of thinking creates division. And I think this need to feel superior is rooted in insecurity. It comes from a place of fear of being wrong, of not having control, or of being exposed to be less than. But when we break down these mental barriers, we realize that every culture, every country, every group has something to offer. And no one culture holds a monopoly on wisdom or value. So then the real work then is to challenge that instinctive in-group bias. It's about recognizing that we're all just human beings trying to find our own way in this world. So the more we allow ourselves to see the value in different perspectives, the less power that feeling of superiority has over us. And this is why now I believe that the more we travel, the more we engage with different cultures, the more we are confronted with the idea that our own way of doing things isn't the only way. And that is an incredible feeling of freedom. By acknowledging our own biases and letting go of the need to feel superior, we open ourselves to the world of new experiences, new relationships, new ideas. It's about realizing that no one culture, no one person is above another. Instead, we are all pieces of a much larger puzzle, each bringing something valuable to the table. So the next time we're faced with a difference, personal or ideological, let's take a moment to pause. Rather than rushing to categorize or to judge, let's remind ourselves that we all have something to learn, something to offer. Because at the end of the day, it's not about being superior, it's about growing together. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching. And I will see you in the comments, and I will see you next week.